All right, my friends, welcome back to another story time. We're coming up at the end of March. It's actually St. Patrick's Day, but I didn't want to let March go by without doing a special story time for Women's History Month, which is the month of March. So I have two stories to share with you about some pretty incredible women who you may or may not have heard of before. So the first book that we're going to read is called May Among the Stars, and it's the story of Mae Jemison, who was the first African-American woman to go to outer space. So this is a story about her childhood and her dreams and how she had to overcome some adversity to get to outer space, you know, as one would expect, because outer space is very far away. All right, here we go. Little May was a dreamer. They say that daydreamers never succeed, but little May was different. One day, May was working on an assignment for school about what she wanted to be when she grew up. What will you tell them, May? I will tell them I want to see Earth. This is Earth, May, her mother said. The flowers, the grass, the forest, and the mountains. We live on Earth. I know, but I want to see Earth from out there. That's an amazing plan, little May. Then you'll have to become an astronaut. That way you can see Earth from space. Astronaut? Do you think I could do that? Of course you can. If you can dream it, if you believe it, and you work hard for it, anything is possible. So her mother was very supportive of her dreams, but it's not always the case. May asked her mom to take her to the library. She searched for books about space and astronaut. We have quite a number of books about going to space and astronauts, if that's something that interests you, and you would also like to see the Earth from outer space. After dinner, May drew pictures of space, and she even made her own astronaut costume out of old orange curtains and cardboard boxes. Later, she asked her dad, "But how do I become an astronaut? It seems impossible." You will find your way, May, because if you dream it, believe in it, and work hard for it, anything is possible. Do you know what you have to do to become an astronaut? It involves a lot of math. I'll say that for starters. But space is so far away. It's closer than you think, little May, and you may get there sooner than you think. Have you ever looked through a telescope before? It does make the Earth seem a little bit closer to the stars. That night, May had a happy dream. She was dancing in space, surrounded by billions of sparkling stars. Below her, she could see Earth floating and turning like a shining crystal ball. She really wants to go to space. The next morning, May told her parents about her dream. They told her, if you can dream it, it's possible. She wanted to tell everyone, and every time she talked about it, her eyes would light up. She even told the cat, so you know it's serious. Oops. In the classroom, Miss Bell told everyone to stand in a line on the rug. Today we are going to share our dreams about the future. What do you want to be, and what do you want to do when you grow up? Who wants to go first? I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a teacher. Football player, obviously. I want to be a mom. I want to go to space, and I want to be an astronaut. This is May. All the kids started laughing. Miss Bell asked, May, are you sure you don't want to be a nurse? Nursing would be a good profession for someone like you. What do you think that means, someone like you? I don't want to be a nurse. I want to be an astronaut. She had manifested it in her dreams, therefore it has to come true. Her mom and dad said that if you can believe it and dream it, anything is possible. May felt very disappointed. On her way home from school, May was quiet. She looked out the car window. Her world turned blue and cold. Nothing was the way it used to be. It really just takes one person to kind of kill your self-confidence. At home, May started crying. Miss Bell said I can't become an astronaut. What a silly thing to say, said her mother. She told me I should be a nurse instead. Her mom wiped away her tears. My dear May, I hope you didn't believe her. Of course I believed her. She's my teacher. I'm sorry Miss Bell didn't encourage you, but she can't stop you. No one can stop you. Follow your dream, May, and go to space. So her mother is still very encouraging of her dream. Thank you, Mom. I promise when I get to space, I will wave to you and Dad from the spaceship. Her mom took her hand and they started dancing. You must always repeat to yourself, if I can dream it, if I can believe in it, and if I work hard for it, anything is possible. And the cat agrees. Looks like the world has a little bit more technicolor to it now, too. When she talks to her mom, everything is very bright. May went on dreaming, believing, and working really hard. And guess what? She went to space and waved to her mom and dad on Earth. And this is adult May in her space suit, getting her official NASA portrait done. It's pretty amazing. About Mae Jemison, May Among the Stars. And that's that one. For our second story that I wanted to share with you, we have a newer book that we got last year called Last March for last Women's History Month. Last March was a little bit of, we got robbed a little for Women's History Month last March. So I never really got to share this book when I bought it, but it's called Alice Across America, the story of the first women's cross-country road trip. And if you can take a look at that car, if you can imagine driving cross-country in that car, it doesn't even have a real top on it. Probably no radio, no air conditioning. Probably breaks down a lot. You can imagine the kind of adventure that would have been in these days as compared to today when we have like a lot more comforts and luxuries in our vehicles. So I would love to share with you this story, Alice Across America. When Alice Ramsey was little, she loved to ride horses. Small ones, tall ones, as long as she was going places, Alice was happy. But as Alice grew up, more people were driving cars. She was curious about the new machines, though she still continued to ride. Until one day when a metal monster spooked Alice's horse. After that frightening incident, Alice's husband John had an idea to keep her safe. John believed that cars were more reliable than horses. They didn't get scared. I wonder if statistically if that is true. From the moment Alice slid behind the driver's wheel, she was in love. She even entered a 2-day driving endurance test to test her driving skills. She earned a perfect score and wowed a fellow driver who worked for Maxwell Briscoe, the makers of Alice's car. Could you imagine? Like, you know, we take a 20-minute driver test to get our license to drive, but I could never imagine doing a 2-day endurance driving. I can barely ride 6 hours in the car without going out of my mind. At dinner after the first day's run, her fellow driver, the car maker's publicist, had a proposal for Alice. He asked if she would drive from New York to California in a new Maxwell car to show the world that the cars were so well built and easy to operate that even a lady could drive one safely. He didn't think women were as good at doing things as men, and he wasn't the only one. The trip sounded challenging, partly because so many roads on the route were unpaved. Also, while the Maxwell Company would offer help to Alice in the form of a guide car in most states, she might sometimes need to rely on her own repair skills to keep the car running. Still, Alice was intrigued. She was about to show the Maxwell publicist and the world that ladies could drive just as well as men, maybe even better. She told them she'd do it, and that she'd be bringing some friends. Looks like girls' night out. All right, as the Maxwell Company ran notices about the trip in the newspaper across the country, Alice continued to hone her skills, like cleaning spark plugs and changing tires. The more she could do on her own, the better prepared she would be. These are all very good skills to have. Being able to change a tire, just do some minor maintenance. 9 months later, on a rainy June morning in New York City, Alice and her 3 friends started their journey. Alice's friend Hermine eagerly looked towards the western horizon where California was waiting. Alice's sister-in-laws, Nettie and Maggie, shivered as Alice cranked the car to a start. Can you imagine just the anticipation of it? Oh, I'd be so excited. Armed with a camera, guidebooks, maps, and some emergency food rations, they were as ready as they would ever be. On this day, driving might have felt different to Alice, perhaps a little scary, like the first time she'd ridden a horse. Still, she had skills and knowledge that she was eager to put to the test, and this was the perfect opportunity. As the car running down the rain-soaked road, picking up speed, Alice's nerves disappeared. Hermine even asked if Alice would give her driving lessons when they got home. Some real intrepid ladies here. Over the next several days, they blazed through Cleveland and soared through Chicago. Nothing could slow them down except bump, rattle, bang. They got their first flat tire, and they hadn't even reached Toledo yet. Toledo's in Ohio. Once Alice made repairs, they journeyed to Chicago, where the car was hit in a traffic jam. No one was hurt, though a hubcap was dented. They stayed in the city for 3 days before continuing to blaze a trail westward, hoping for miles of blue sky. I will say, if you do drive to Cleveland these days in a modern car, on a modern thruway on I-90, it will take you 8 hours to get to Cleveland from here. You could do it in a day. So you can imagine how the slow going it would have been back then to take several days to get to Cleveland. But as the days went on and they crossed west of the Mississippi River, the skies over Iowa became dark. The car wheezed and stalled, overheated from a hard day's travel. Hermine sighed. They were stuck, but Alice knew what they needed: water to cool the radiator. Nettie and Maggie exchanged a look. The well-to-do sisters grabbed their cut-glass toiletry jars and carefully scooped up water, ounce by ounce, from a nearby ditch. Alice's friends were helping her on the journey without ever taking the wheel. As they drove on, heavy rains turned the dirt roads into a muddy mess. Worse, the river in their path had risen too high to cross, forcing them to wait for the rain to let up and the river to recede. With no town in sight, they would have to camp in the car. No cell phones, no GPS. You're just out there. When they were finally ready to set off again, the mud had other ideas. Farmers had to be fetched from a nearby farmhouse to help tow the car to safety. At last, they were back on the road. All right, it's getting a little scary now. I was excited for them at first, but I hope it turns out okay. Soon people began waiting by the roadside to catch a glimpse of the women who changed flat tires, repaired broken brake pedals, and cleaned spark plugs. Some folks didn't believe Alice and her team would ever reach California, but others were excited and showed up to cheer the women on their way. Amazing to think of a bunch of ladies in a car was such a novelty in those days that you would run out to the road to see them as they drove by. Sometimes Alice gave interviews to local newspapers, but her mind was elsewhere, focused on their maps and directions to ensure they stayed on course. Alice found herself driving faster through the Midwest, hoping they reach a town soon. When? What's going to happen? Oh, bump, rattle, bang. Looks like something bad. They landed in a pothole more stubborn than Alice herself. They would have to fix this quickly. It was nearly dark. Alice started to have doubts. There had been people along the journey who disapproved of her being a woman and wanting to drive. There were still those who thought she wouldn't make it. The only way to silence everyone's doubts, including her own, was to reach California, no matter how many potholes stood in the way. Alice had to keep going. She could keep going. She'd gotten them this far, after all, driving for more than a month to reach a part of the country she'd never seen. With some quick thinking, she would cross any distance and solve any problem. As they sped west, Alice followed the trails of old wagon tracks, which led them through a Nebraska town where the road was blocked by a sheriff and his men searching for an escaped criminal. It took nearly 2 hours to catch him before the women were able to move on. It's like Wild West out there. Pretty dangerous. The next day back on the road, they were back on the road and headed to Wyoming. Oh, they're almost there. Their directions were sometimes unclear, so Alice began to follow the wires of the telegraph poles, trusting them to lead her toward towns. 2 days after entering the state, Alice was exhausted, having crossed the North Platte River on a railroad bridge. Luckily, her mind spotted a roadside hotel, but it turned out the hotel's beds were already occupied by bed bugs. Imagine that. You've been on the road for a month, you just want a comfortable bed, and not to be so. Back on the road, Alice pressed the gas. California was on the horizon. Of course, things weren't easy. Sometimes they hit dead ends, forcing them to backtrack for miles through stifling heat. And sometimes there was little more to eat than cornflakes and canned tomatoes scrounged from a general store. And nothing, not hunger, hot days, chilly rain, washed out roads, or the worst mud, could stop Alice now. One day, as they drove into view of towering mountain slopes where ancient sequoia trees stood tall and proud, Alice's stomach flipped. The looming Sierra Nevada mountains and their strange trees could mean only one thing: California. They had done it. It looks like they're like in the redwood forest or something. Very tall trees. A terrific crowd greeted Alice's group in San Francisco on a cool August day. Their car was more than green from all the dust gathered on its 2-month, nearly 4,000-mile journey. Alice waved to many strangers who weren't laughing but cheering as she drove in a motorcade with horns blaring in celebration. Now the world understood. You know what they understood? A lady could drive just as well as a man, or even better. Over miles and miles of unpaved roads through rough weather conditions, brave Alice had become guide, mechanic, and leader of her group, and the first female driver to successfully cross the country. It's hard to imagine how much more difficult that trip would have been when Alice did it, at the beginning of the 20th century, 21st, I don't remember, early 1900s. 1909, June 9th, 1909. Yeah, it's really hard to imagine how much more difficult that trip would have been in 1909 when cars were just barely a thing. So anyway, that's the story of Alice Ramsey, the first woman to cross the country by car. All right, my friends, that is it for another story time. We will see you in April. So I hope you enjoy the beginning of spring and that you're enjoying, the extra sunlight that we have. All right, we'll see you again soon. Bye.